King's Warrior, Book 1 of the Minstrel's Song, by Jenelle, Leanne, Schmidt. Narrated by Benjamin Fife. Hi all, this is Benjamin Fife. I'm here today with Jenelle Leanne Schmidt, the author of King's Warrior, with whom I'm having the pleasure of producing these audiobooks. And I just got this and these in the mail yesterday, and they're so exciting. Like, on the audiobook, it only shows like this much of the cover. But here we have, there's a dragon on the back. You can't really, I have bad lighting for this in here, but I was so excited. And plus it's just, I love paper books. It's just, it's nostalgia, but it's just cool. It's also really cool to see I narrated something that thick. So
yeah, massive.
Anyway, Jenelle, why don't you just tell me and listeners about yourself and your family and how you got started as an author to begin with?
Yeah. I'm Jenelle, and I wrote the Minstrel Songs series, and I originally wrote the first book for my family, that one. Yeah. My dad came home from school. I came home from school, and my dad challenged me to write a book for him to read out loud to my siblings and the rest of the family. And then he offered to pay me for it. So I decided that I'd give it a try, and it turned into a 4-book series.
How old were you when you started it?
That would have been 2001. So I was 19. Yeah. So he asked me to write 10 pages a day, and I did that and finished it before I went back to school. And then everybody said that they needed to know more. And I had not intended to turn it into a series, but that happened.
So. Cool. I just started doing these interviews with authors last month. I think you watched the one I did with Paul Arvidsson.
I did.
When I first saw the book up for audition, I looked up your website and I kind of looked up your story. And part of what attracted me to auditioning for this was the account of how your dad read to you guys as a kid. And that's exactly how I've started, how I got into wanting to do audiobooks in the first place, was reading to my kids every night.
That's awesome. And how many kids do you have?
I have 6 kids, ranging from a year and a half to on up to the oldest will be 18 this January. Which
wow, that's a range.
Really weird. Well, the last one was a complete surprise. But we're absolutely thrilled he's part of our family, and it wouldn't be complete without him. Plus, it gave us the opportunity to use the name Atticus. So
that's a good one.
All of our kids have a name from a book that we love. So
that's cool. All of my kids' middle names from Lord of the Rings, so
which is awesome.
Kindred spirits.
Yeah, and our oldest is Eleanor from Lord of the Rings. So which is
that's cool.
That's Sam Gamgee's daughter eventually, but the flower in Lothlorien.
So I had a question for you.
Okay.
Since you were talking about seeing the book come up for audition, from I know how like everything works from the author side. You put your book up for audition, and then you kind of hope that somebody gives it a try. And I was very much like, oh, nobody's going to want to do this because it's huge and there's a lot of weird names. And so from your perspective, do you get like alerts when something comes along or do you just have to like kind of keep an eye on, like, how do you see when a book comes up for audition?
For me, I mean, they have everything on the acx.com website. You can have it where you just see everything that's available for audition, or you can filter it down to whatever. I've actually gotten it to the point where I've saved my filters, so I can just copy and paste into this, and then it filters it down. So it can filter it by compensation or whatever. But anyway, I also occasionally will type in things like dragon to see what's there, because I like narrating dragons.
And you're good at it.
But just I look for fantasy books, and for it's anything. I mean, you look at what I've done, and I've done a whole wide range of stuff. There's only a couple of genres that I won't do, and
Right.
but yeah, so I'm just looking for something that jives with me. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm auditioning for a lot, and sometimes I'm way too busy with books to audition.
Right.
But um, I guess I'd like to hear how you chose me as a narrator.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that this morning. So again, like I put the book out. Well, okay. So long story. I always kind of wanted to narrate my own books. Ever since I listened to Hank the Cowdog growing up, and the author narrates his own books, and I loved that. I thought that was cool. That brings kind of a different feel to it. But then so I kind of waited a long time. Like King's Warrior's been out for 8 years now.
Mhm.
But
Longer before that as another title, though,
yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah, I
Yeah.
released it as The Dragon's Eye, which was awful. Yeah, it needed another couple of rounds edits, but
Okay.
yeah. If you can find a copy, you can compare the two.
I've seen the cover, so on Goodreads.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
think I took the picture for the cover, and then a friend edited a dragon onto it. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We
Anyway,
thought it was cool at the time.
so you
I
were
was in
saying,
college. We thought it was cool. um, but so then last year I wrote and published a children's book, Christmas book.
uh-huh.
And I read like narrated it on, and then we put together with some music and with the pictures, and so it's, you can find it on YouTube, and it turned out really nice. But for the 500 word book, it was about 2 hours of work. And that was when I started realizing that in order to be a narrator, you need a lot of time and you need a lot of quiet. And so it was either going to be I can narrate my own books or I can write more. And so then we started looking, and was like, okay, let's go, let's see if we can find a narrator. And I'd kind of looked on ACX here and there, and had seen a couple of people and kind of listened to some people that I'd heard, that I thought, oh yeah, someone like that could do it. But a lot of them were out of my price range, and we had the plus option,
Hmm.
right, which is where you can pay a little bit and then you also split the royalties, as you know,
Hmm.
but some of my readers or listeners probably don't. um, and so then I just put it up there for an audition, and I asked some of my author friends, like, what do you put in the, like, there's like a box where you can put like additional
Comments and all that.
information. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I was like, what do you put in there? And they were like, oh, like how long the book is, whether or not it's got hard to pronounce names, how many characters there are. And so I started typing stuff out, and I was like, oh boy, nobody's gonna touch this.
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah. So then you were the first person to audition.
Really?
Yes, you were.
Well, how
And
about that?
yeah, and I really liked your style, and I really liked how excited you seemed to be about the project. And then, but my husband and I were like, well, we don't want to just take the first person who comes along. So we kind of waited to see if anybody else would audition, and two other people auditioned, and one we were like, no, obviously not. And then the other one, it was kind of a like, well, it's very different style, but you and he were both very good, and it kind of came down to they'd both be great.
Hmm.
Who do I want to work with more? And what really kind of pushed you over the top was the personal note that you included in your audition, where you kind of told me a little bit about yourself and how excited you were about the project. And then you also compared me to Lloyd Alexander, which was kind of like, yes, you've read all the right sorts of books. So let's go. So that was kind of where it came down to. It just seemed like to be as enthusiastic about the project as we are. So
Well, you have a minstrel named Kieran Kane, and it's like Kieran Kane, Fluther Flam. So
yes.
it's I saw the similarities. Although
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say I like this better. But
Oh,
you know,
see, that's why I'm
I
working with you.
I have absolutely adored narrating this series so far. And um,
Oh, good.
in this interview, I don't want to get into too many spoilers for people who are just getting into it, but I'm halfway through my recording of Second Son, and I have oh about 10% of Yorian's Hand left to read,
Okay.
which I'm really excited to get to that one because that one
Yeah.
that one is like really fast paced. I'm like, dude,
Yes.
holy cow.
It,
You
Yorian's
bring
Hand is the smallest of the books.
you
Yeah, for
bring
sure.
so much together in it too.
Right.
And it makes me also see why it is that you went ahead and did Second Son, which is kind of a prequel
Yep.
before writing it, because you needed that to establish some
Yeah.
of the stuff in it,
Yeah, for sure. Also, when I was writing the series, I had no idea where it was going.
which is always fun. Okay. I guess some other questions I have for you. This is a pretty fleshed out world that you've created.
Mhm.
Do you think that you'll return to this world, whether it be, you know, a completely different kind of story, but still on this world, or
Mhm.
do you think in your future writing you're just going to go completely different?
Um, Currently I am going completely different. Every now and then I go back and well, and also I'll do a read along, or like for example, I'm listening to you reading the books,
Hmm.
and it's like, oh, I love this world. Maybe there could be other stories. Uh, Minstrel's Call kind of wraps everything up really well, though.
Uh-huh.
So it's I could see future stories. I don't know what they are.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, at this point, I don't have any plans. I have like some like historical story, like well, not historical, but his history of different things in the world that I have written out. When I wrote The Minstrel's Call, the first thing that I did was I wrote it like going all the way back to like the beginning of time. And when I sent it to I got 80,000 words in, and I sent it to my dad, and he was like, "No, I want more Brant." And I was like, "Oh, well then, now I have all this history written out. I guess I could pull from that." So one of the things that you'll see when you get to Minstrel's Call is every chapter starts with um, like a quote or a little bit of a
Yeah.
poem, or
I flipped through it already just
yeah,
because I can't resist that. I'm
right,
not one who, goes to the last page of the book or anything, but I
okay,
flip through and see kind of the format, and I saw
right,
that, which I love books that do that.
yeah.
So I guess the other thing with the world, so do you think of your series as set on Earth in some kind of distant past, future, or another planet entirely? And from my perspective, I kind of tend to think of it as something that you could get to from the wood between worlds.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely would say that it's not Earth in any time period. It's a
Okay.
very much its own thing. Not even sure if it's actually a globe or if it's just flat, because I
Discworld.
hadn't figured that out yet. So as fleshed out as it is, there are things I don't know about it.
Have you read the
Um,
Terry Pratchett Discworld series?
I am reading those right now. Yes.
They're
Yep.
kind of a little on the dirty side sometimes, but they're
Yeah. The
awesome.
the Night Watch series is actually quite clean. We've been enjoying them a lot. So
I, Probably my favorite. I haven't actually read all that many of them.
okay.
I've seen the movie versions of them, but I did
Okay.
read Thud, and Thud was hilarious.
That is the one we're reading right now, actually.
Mr. Shine, him Diamond.
Yes. Yes, we just found out why that is. So, but yeah, we started
It's a good
with
one.
Guards Guard, and we've been following Sam Vimes and crew. And
That's
I think
cool.
Vimes is probably one of my favorite characters ever. So,
So have you seen the theatrical or whatever made for TV interpretations of them?
so I started watching that
There's The
years
Color
ago.
of Magic.
Yes, we started watching that, and we didn't understand it, so we turned it
Yeah.
off.
There's Color of Magic, which, that's the first one that we saw,
Okay.
and it has, it has Sean Astin in it, and that was
Yeah.
like, oh sweet, Sean Astin, and
Right.
then also you have, Christopher Lee as the voice of Death in that one, and
Yeah.
which I love that in his novels, Death is really a benevolent character. Um,
Right. He tries so hard.
but then my favorite ones of any of them, there's also Going Postal, and there's some cartoon versions of the Weird Sisters and things like that. But my favorite one is actually The Hogfather, which
Okay.
if you don't watch any of the other ones, that one is just pristine. It's unfortunate that they don't have Christopher Lee as the voice of Death in it, because Death is really the main character in it.
Oh, good to know.
But well, he's one of a few main characters. But
Yeah.
the I, we watch it every year, holiday season, and probably another time or two around.
Yeah.
Hogfather is the equivalent of the Discworld's Santa Claus. But
Okay, good to
anyway,
know.
and Death has a monologue towards the end of it that is just the best explanation for why it's so important to believe in things like Santa Claus. And it's one of my all-time favorite holiday movies. So anyway,
Okay, I'll have to
I
look that.
I digress very much from what we were supposed to be talking about, but
It's all right. It's fun. I
I
love
love
talking
that show. So
movies.
so I guess with literature and things, what are your inspirations, and like who are your favorite authors, dead and living?
Oh, that's always a hard question. There's a lot of them. I've
Mhm.
read a lot. I read very fast. I always have. It's not something that I learned. It's just how I read, and I read every word. I don't skim. But a lot of my favorite authors, like from from when I was a kid, were, I mean, Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander, Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of the Enchanted Forest Chronicles by
Oh, I
Patricia
love
C.
those.
Reed. Anything with Chronicles in the name, usually I'm a fan of.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien. And then pretty much anything by George MacDonald. So far, I haven't read anything of his I didn't like.
Princess
So
and Curdie is one of my favorites.
yes.
I love that
Princess
book.
and Curdie is your favorite?
Yeah.
Oh,
I that was the first one that I read of
in that
his.
as a sequel.
What's that?
I was disappointed in that as a sequel.
See, and it was the first one that I read, so it wasn't a sequel to me. It was like, oh, there's something that comes before this book, but that was the first one I
Right.
read, and I loved it. So,
Yeah.
but
I think well, I mean, the the Deathgate Cycle by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman was probably one of the first fantasy series I ever read on my own.
hmm.
Um Anything by Stephen Lawhead, I love him. I asked him to endorse my latest book and he sent me a note back. So that was nice. He
it
said no, but he wrote me.
it was a nope note. How
It was a
unfortunate.
note. Yes,
How
it was
unfortunate.
sad, but yeah. But yeah.
Um, have you? What about like Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper?
I really liked the first book. And then I felt like that was a series that just kind of got weirder.
It's a
The
little
further,
random,
yeah,
so but
yeah.
I have a soft spot for that because the last book in the series, I
Uh-huh.
read it when I read it when I was, I think, about 11 years old, and that was the first book I ever wept in. So,
Oh,
but
uh-huh.
anyway,
Yeah.
so
When I was really like when I was little, like before, 'cause I got into fantasy about in high school. I mean, I'd read Chronicles of Narnia and I'd read, Lord of the Rings, and my dad had read those to us. And then I think I reread Two Towers like 27 times. And it's really funny because Two Towers is not anybody's favorite book, apparently.
I think it's awesome.
I love it. And people get like, oh, Sam and Frodo are just walking. I loved that. I don't know why. But when I was younger, I just a lot of dog books. Dogs
Mhm.
and horse books was kind of my thing.
Hmm.
And Albert Payson Terhune, which nobody ever has heard of him, but I loved his books about his collies and so stuff like that.
You know, you're mentioning that Two Towers is nobody's favorite book and whatever.
Uh-huh.
Brings up another question that I had for you about
Okay.
what do you think of reviews and how do you deal with them? And I want to kind of preview this with a discussion we had a couple
Yeah,
weeks ago that,
for sure.
you know, I I just I've looked at I've looked at the books on Goodreads and on whatever before, but I read a couple of reviews and they were like scathing, like, did you read the same book that I did?
They
And
may not have.
and and
Those some reviews from an unedited version that is no longer available.
well, these were of King's Warrior, not of the other, not of the dragon side.
The King's War you're holding in your hand is
Uh-huh.
actually like the third or fourth edition.
Ah, cool. Well,
Better.
anyway, but the the thing that when I saw there were like 2-star reviews and the things they were saying about it, I'm like, dude, you people hate literature. And so after that, I'm like, okay, well, let's see what people say about Fellowship of the Ring. And I could have like copied and pasted from the one review to the other, and it was like the exact same, which shouldn't surprise me that much because, okay, I come from a family where most of them read a whole lot. My brother and my older brother, he's 5 years older than me, he can't stand Tolkien because all the poetry and whatever, and also my favorite dead author is Charles Dickens, which Charles Dickens is nothing if not loquacious. Um,
Well, he knew what he was doing. He kind of didn't he start out writing serials,
yeah, yeah,
right? So he
that's
had to keep the story going.
that's how most of his books were published initially, was as serials. But it's
Right.
also something where I hear people say, well, you can tell he was paid by the word, which he was, but at the same time, he was paid by the word, but he was a wordsmith.
Yes.
I mean, the phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Hmm.
Well, he takes the picture and gives you 1,000 words for it.
Hmm.
So I mean, I've read books where people are describing things and I'm like, why on earth are you describing that? I don't need to
Hmm.
know that. And I can see why people would say that with Dickens and whatever. But at the same time, it's so visceral. It's
Yeah.
like you he gives every little character their own personality that it's like I would know this guy on the street if I met him. So
Right.
anyway,
I
so
think that's why the movies based on his books turn out so well,
mhm.
to be perfectly honest. Like I actually do have a hard time reading Dickens, um, personally. Probably, I mean, if he had written fantasy, I'd probably like look over it, but because fantasy is kind of my thing. But I love the movies based on his books
Can
because
I
like
tell you?
I don't have anything against his plot or his characters. I think it's just something about the writing style, and I just don't get along. But
Well, and for me, Dickens, I love reading Dickens, but unlike you, I have never been a fast reader. Part
uh,
of that is because when I read, I I've always read aloud in my head even. I'm
yeah.
applying voices to people. And
Mhm.
so for me, I've now read all of Dickens, but 90% of Dickens that I read as an audiobook. So it
Okay.
was someone else reading it to me.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
and with that, then I mean, I did it the last 3 years that I was working the day job. I
Mhm.
is when I listened to the entirety of Dickens.
Yeah.
So anyway, but
Well, oh, I'm sorry. You want to talk about reviews, but
yeah,
I have a
yeah,
question.
I wanted to hear what you thought about it, and then we can go on to whatever your
Yeah.
question is. So
What do I think about reviews?
and how do you react to them, and how do you deal with them?
Um, Now I kind of just like I can't not read them. I know some authors say just don't read them, and I can't not. If I see that it's a like a 2-star review, I might kind of read it and then go cry for a little bit. Um, but 5-star reviews, you know it's going to be good stuff, and sometimes there's a critique in there that's not bad. But uh, I mean back when I first published, I didn't know how to take reviews and I didn't necessarily take them well. I didn't go and like talk about them because, you don't want to do that. But yeah, I think the further along I've gotten in the writing process and having worked with some real editors as well, has really helped with just kind of letting it roll off my back. And it's, my books aren't for everybody and
Hmm.
I can't write for everybody. And so, if I see a 1-star, 2-star review, even sometimes, 3 stars can kind of go either way. It's like, yeah, okay. So my book wasn't for you. That's fine. You're not the target audience I'm shooting for then. So
Yeah, for me, the main thing is like I don't understand when people are jerks about it. Like it's fine if you say I really didn't like this book. It wasn't for me.
right.
But
Yeah.
yeah. The other thing that I absolutely hate is
Uh-huh.
when you don't get a review, but you get a 2-star rating. It's like,
Oh yes.
can you tell me why?
Right.
I mean, if you didn't like it that much, but you disliked it enough to say this sucks,
Right.
give me some pointers here.
Right. Well, and now that Amazon is just letting people rate things without leaving a written
Uh-huh.
review, like now I don't even read, like I don't even go look at them anymore because I'm like, it's going to say, it's going to jump from 17 reviews to 32 reviews, but that doesn't actually mean that anybody has written anything. So
Yeah.
I kind of have given up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you had some questions for
Yeah.
me too.
So you said you read when you read out, even to yourself, right?
Hmm.
And you said you listen to audiobooks and stuff. You kind of hear the voices in your head. You are extremely consistent with the voices that you do, and like I think that's impressive with a cast of 3 or 4. But personally, I have a cast of like 67, which didn't scare you away. So thank you. But how do you keep that consistent? Like, do you make notes? Do you read through like one character at a time?
That would be a royal nightmare. Now, when you wrote that question for me and I looked at it in advance, and I actually had a thought that kind of goes with that, that
Okay.
it would be interesting to record a book that way. And you could really stay in character well, I think, but
Uh-huh.
you would be editing in, and it would
Right.
make what is already a long process into about 10 times as long.
Yeah, I was
So
thinking that. I was thinking about the question. I was like, it can't be
So,
that.
so my somewhat related thing that is really not really related is I've always thought it would be interesting to watch all of Star Wars from only Darth Vader's perspective. But so, or any show. I mean, you could watch Lord of
Yeah,
the Rings from only Frodo's perspective. That,
right.
but
Uh-huh.
anyway, to answer your question though, um, one thing that I do and that you have provided superb feedback on, better than any author I've ever worked with,
Oh,
is
good.
I ask you to kind of give me an ideal cast. So
Mhm.
if you have this character that basically you say, okay, well, this character I want to be played by Sean Astin or Sean Bean or Joe
Mhm.
Blow or Angelina Jolie, which I don't think you have. No, you don't have Angelina Jolie as any of them.
No, I
But
didn't.
the way that you broke it down, you have their general accent kind of uh, ideas, and you have an actor. Sometimes you have YouTube thing attached to him, and a lot of the actors that you put as some of the cast, I'm like, I have no idea who this person is. So I would Google them and I'd watch them, and I'm like, oh, okay, I know I've seen them in this. Or sometimes I hadn't seen them in anything, and I'd
Right.
watch a few things,
Okay.
and but by doing that, it it just kind of cements it in my head as,
Uh-huh.
okay, this is this person,
Mhm.
and then I'm able to take and remember that. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to be consistent through the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
Honestly, it like right now, so I'm halfway through Second Son,
Uh-huh.
and I am going back to the beginning and saying, okay, how did I voice this character again? Because I want it to be consistent.
Right.
Um, and
Well, that's probably a hard book too, since the characters grow up so
oh
dramatically.
yeah, and I mean, I don't know how far you've listened through to what I've recorded so far. I'm a little worried that I've aged Brant too much already, but I have him pretty much near voicing how he is in King's Warrior
Right.
already. But I certainly don't start out with him at that.
Mhm. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I
But
mean, personally, I probably start hearing him as Brant from King's Warrior about the time he gets to AMI, and that doesn't really make sense, but that's kind of where I have it.
I
Like,
have it basically for me about the time he gets to Emnole is
yeah, that would be fine
when I
too.
started
Yeah.
voicing
It's
him.
it's like one or the other is kind of where he kind of becomes Brant to me.
And
But
he kind of goes there even now that I'm now recording to the point where he's at AOMI, and
mm,
there's still a little bit when I'm like, okay, he's still a little bit younger attitude here,
right.
and I don't know whether that comes through in my performance or not. You'd have to tell me, or listeners or whatever, but it's
Yeah.
the other thing that makes it easy
Mhm.
in keeping characters consistent is when the author is consistent, and your writing is superb. Like
Thank you.
the the insights that you have in these books, like into human nature, and like I think I emailed you with one thing, like after I recorded a chapter that had
Mhm.
Kai and Royan, and it just reminded me a bit about my brother and I's relationship.
Yeah.
And like, it's it blows my mind the insights that you're able to put in there. And in King's Warrior, like there was when Brant loses his family. Oh, that's a spoiler, but it's in chapter 2, so I'm not going to get
Pretty
too
early
worked up
on.
about it. Um, just it's something that is this series one that is going to blow somebody's mind with new ideas and whatever. Not necessarily, but I love how it's so much about what it is to be human and what
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is to learn and grow.
Uh-huh.
And so that you did a great job of coaching me through how to get the voices right, and I try to do my best to keep them consistent as I go along. So
Well, I
that's
think
the
you do a
long and the short of
fabulous
it.
job. So,
So
oh.
with your characters in your books,
Mhm.
do you base them on people you know ever, or are they just random creations?
It's kind of a combination. For the most part, characters kind of step into my head. Have you seen The Man Who Invented Christmas?
Haven't, but I should because Dickens is my favorite author.
Yes. Yeah, I was surprised. It is fantastic. And Christopher Plummer plays Scrooge.
Which I love
And
Christopher Plummer.
yes, I me too. And I love uh
Star Trek
Michael
6. Oh,
Caine. Michael Caine is
oh
he?
yeah,
Yeah.
Michael Caine is
Love
awesome
him
too.
as Scrooge in the Muppets one,
Oh yeah.
but Christopher Plummer has become my all-time favorite Scrooge. And there's this scene where Dickens is trying to figure out Scrooge's name, and he's sitting there, he's like
I think
Scrums.
I've heard about it.
Yeah, you might have seen the clip because it was kind of like
I haven't seen the clip, but I've heard it described to me. So go
yeah.
ahead. Go
And
ahead.
and he, the maid kind of comes in. She's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "If you can get the character's name right, then sometimes they appear and introduce themselves, right?" And then he says Scrooge, and then Christopher Plummer just kind of like emerges from the darkness, and he's just he's Scrooge, every inch of him, and just
Okay.
exactly who he is. And to some extent, watching that was like, oh, I'm messed up because that's me. Like that's a lot of times it is. They just step in. Like I don't do a lot of like
Modeling.
character development sheets, or like that it's just I just see them, they get their name, and then they are who they are.
Huh.
Uh, that said, I kind of based Brant and Kieran Kane a little bit on my brothers when I was writing, because their relationship, just kind of the way that they interact, like,
Uh-huh.
and as you go through the series, like sometimes they just annoy each other to death, and yet they make each other better, and they make each
Uh-huh.
other stronger, and eventually they come to appreciate the other, and that's kind of, I think those are kind of my favorite parts, where you can kind of see that is a very deep friendship, and it is kind of a brotherhood,
Yeah.
for them. And yeah, so
Well, and your initial feedback on my first performance of Kieran and Kane, which is actually what we still stuck with,
yeah.
despite I re-recorded the whole thing, and then we're like, no, let's stick with what it was. You
Sorry about
had
that.
no, it's something that it's been an interesting thing, and especially now that I've read through most of Yorian's Hand.
Mhm.
um, the actor that you said to model it after was David Tennant, and I mean, anyone who listens to my performance of Kieran and Kane and listens to I'm if I'm trying to impersonate David Tennant, I'm doing it wrong. Um, but it still informed me a little bit, and also now that I've read through Second Son a couple of times, and now that I'm reading through Yorian's Hand and I'm
Mhm.
seeing where he's going, I'm like, okay, um, this is completely the 10th Doctor. So
Which I hadn't seen because it wasn't out then.
yeah, but it's something where the similarities between them
Yeah,
is it like as especially as I've been
right.
reading through Yorian's Hand, I'm like, dude, this is he's got the exact same kind of pathos or whatever as
Right.
David Tennant
Yeah,
does
for sure.
the 10th Doctor.
Right.
So
Which is probably why 10 is my favorite. But
10
so
is I'm kind of, for me, my favorite is whichever one I'm watching usually.
That is also true. That is also true.
But I vacillate between 10 and 11 is my favorite. But I also, the first season with Jodie Whittaker, have you seen
Uh,
the new ones with her?
I have not. No.
I haven't. No, we did finish the second season, and
Okay.
part of the second season, it feels like beating a dead horse
Mm,
about some things.
yeah.
But her first season
Mhm.
was the best written season of Doctor Who I have seen, and she absolutely owned the role. And I'm like,
Okay.
dude, she's awesome. So anyway, you should check her out. And
Okay.
the end of the second season kind of it has some cool stuff. Anyway, I won't get into it like I
Oh.
did with with Paul Arvidsson as much as because you're not British. But anyway, um,
That is true.
neither am I. But half the books I'm
There's still
narrating,
accents, so
yeah,
it's all right.
which I I gotta say, the first book that I got paid to do
Mhm.
as in British accent was Pemberley, which
Okay.
um, is Mr. Darcy's Dragon, which is a Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice variation, which takes 3 books to do that one, and then she's got 2 on Persuasion,
Uh-huh.
and she's going to do a third one that actually the Persuasion ones also brings in some of the characters from Pride and Prejudice, but the third one that she's working on now will be complete mix of all those characters, which
Oh,
is cool.
cool.
But anyway, so within about a month after it came out, Pemberley, I
Mhm.
had one of her fans on her website said, "I thought it was Richard Armitage," and I'm like, "I must be doing something right." um,
That's praise.
I'm like, "Yeah, getting compared to Richard Armitage, I'm good with that." So,
There you go.
uh,
That's awesome.
which I had before he was in the Hobbit movies, which
Mhm.
book to movie. I won't get into. I still haven't seen the third one because I just can't bring myself to. Um,
Oh, it's so good.
it's so good. It's
Here's the thing. Here's the thing.
it's not the
Here's my
book.
whole philosophy. Here's my whole philosophy on the Hobbit movies. And this is why I can love them to pieces, even though they are not an adaptation, because they're not an adaptation, right?
Uh-huh.
The Lord of the Rings movies are an adaptation of the books. The Hobbit movies are a sequel trilogy to the Lord of the Ring, or a prequel trilogy to the Lord of the Rings movies based on the book.
Loosely.
Yes, pretty well, actually. I mean, there's a
You know,
lot of like, we just read them, and I was like, we just read the book to the
uh-huh.
kids. It's like, oh, there's a lot of that that's in the movie that I didn't remember as being in the book.
Yeah.
And then we read it, and I was like, oh, that was in the book. Obviously, there are characters who are not in the book at all and are in the movie, but it's kind of one of those things where, like Derek and I have talked about it. If you were to really do, if Peter Jackson were to really do an adaptation of The Hobbit, it would not have fit with the Lord of the Rings movies because
Mm-mm.
Tolkien's tone
It's a
from
different
Hobbit to
flavor.
Lord of the Rings is totally different.
Yeah,
It's not
it's a
all
completely different flavor.
like, can you imagine Hugo Weaving and the other elves hanging from trees singing ridiculous songs at Bilbo and the dwarves as they
Yeah.
come through?
Yeah.
Like
And
it
Attercop
would
and
work. Right?
yeah. Well, and I guess that's part of the thing is to me, part of what I love about The Hobbit is The Hobbit is a kid's book
Yes.
and it's hard. Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings is a lot headier, and
Yeah.
I love all of it.
Right.
But to me, and this is why I have issue with it is
Right.
they took the Hobbit and they made it into a prequel, exactly what you
Right.
said.
Yes.
Uh, So I watched the first one and I'm like, well, this is cool,
Yeah.
and and you know the stuff that they added in, I'm like, this is stuff that is. I know some of this is from the appendices from
Right.
his books.
Oh yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and so I knew where he was drawing on some of it, but then
Mhm.
you get to the second one, and I'm like, okay, this is somebody read The Hobbit to a 4-year-old who then told the plot to Peter Jackson, and he's like, okay, well, and then we'll put in this and this and this, and there we go. Which he's an awesome filmmaker, and
He
I
is.
loved what he did with with the Lord of the Rings, though my
Yes.
wife really takes issue with how he trashed Faramir. But
Yeah. I think the extended edition did help
yes,
with that.
yes. I
I have a problem with how he mistreated Boromir, but
Yeah, but anyway, I think the overall how he did Lord of the Rings was so much better than how he did The Hobbit, but I will
yeah.
probably eventually watch the third one. Anyway, what were
The
we
behind the scenes of The
uh
Hobbit is also, like, just to kinda get into the head and kinda watching Richard Armitage,
mhm.
like, as he's carrying around his copy of, like, The Hobbit.
That's
And
cool.
there are a couple of times where he like, there's one place where Richard Armitage is even talking about something that his character was going to do, and he was, like, searching through the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings to try and figure out, like, "Can I justify this being in the movie?"
Mhm,
And then he kind of found a spot where he was like, "Okay, I could see Tolkien maybe, yes, we're extrapolating a little bit, but I think it's okay." And so then he was like, "Okay, I can say that line," or whatever. And so
mhm,
it's kinda neat to see how carefully they actually were treating the
mhm.
subject material, but yeah,
Well, I'll have to give
special
that one
feature
another
preparation.
shot too. But first, I'm thinking family movie night this week is going to be the man who invented Christmas.
Oh,
So
yes, for sure, for sure.
so I think we got on that tangent because of Richard Armitage, probably.
Probably.
I really don't know. But my first exposure to Richard Armitage was actually in the adaptation of North and South, which he's
Yes,
phenomenal in.
yes.
I love that. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
um, what other questions do you have for me, or are there any other questions that I had given you that you want to discuss? Because I think we're getting short on time here.
Yeah. Um, so one of the questions, and I ask this because my sister's a singer, and
Hmm.
so she works very hard to protect her voice. Does your voice ever just kind of get worn out or tired, or do you have to do anything special to kind of make sure that that doesn't happen? Or lots of water?
Lots of water.
Yeah.
Um, I have honey and lemon juice with some
Mhm.
essential oils mixed in a little spray bottle, and I use that as needed. Um, it's also something. I mean, I do. I basically record for about 3 to 4 hours a day,
Okay.
um, and it's doing retakes or reading through chapter and whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I do that in the middle of the night usually because it's quietest then,
Right.
and I do my editing in the day.
Mhm.
But like you mentioned in there about the long term health of it, like things like
Yeah.
getting nodes and whatever. It's
Right.
something that I'm aware of because this is my instrument. Um,
Right. For sure.
uh, but it's also something where I've taken some voice lessons from Paul Harms, which he was at one point he was the principal tenor in the LA Opera Theater.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
my wife took a whole lot more lessons from him, and she now is a vocal. She's now a vocal teacher as well, and so she's pretty good about saying you should be a little more careful with your voice. Like if especially if I've got a cold or something and I'm
Yeah.
talking down in the gravel, she's like, "Oh, oh." I'm like, "Yes, okay." So yawn
Right.
size, and that's part of the thing that Paul was very good about teaching is, he had taught people who, scream death metal and that kind of thing
Yeah.
on to, opera singers and whatever. And part of it
Right.
is you can do about anything you want to with your voice as long as you do what you need to take care of it after you're done.
Okay.
And
Good.
I mean, I think back to when I was in high school and, at basketball and football games and whatever, and going completely hoarse because I was yelling because I wanted to get the pizza for pride or whatever, and not being able to speak the next day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's no way I would do that now. and and there are times when, as a parent, with teenagers especially, that sometimes I raise my voice more than I ought to, and I'm like, dang it, I really need to not do that. But
For multiple reasons.
yeah, for multiple reasons. Um, but
Different concerns than most people have, but yeah.
yeah, but it is something that I'm
Mhm.
more aware of it than I used to. And there's things where like we were my in-laws didn't live down the road from us, and they heat their house primarily with wood.
Mm.
and um, they so there's a lot of cutting and stacking and whatever of wood, and
Okay.
there's been a couple of times when we were supposed to go and help that it was windy, and I'm like, I've got to record tonight, and I had a cold last week. I'm not going to go over there. And
Yeah, for
my
sure.
wife has been very supportive of me and said, no,
That's good.
that's okay. This is how you're supporting our family now, and we can take care of it. And luckily, we also have 3 teenagers right now, so they can do a lot of the stuff that I used to do. And it's pretty good. But not that I, not that they do everything and I do nothing, but there are times when I make a conscious choice not to go out in foul
Right.
weather or whatever, or if the allergy count is high or whatever. I'm just a lot more aware of how my throat is feeling and that kind of thing. So anyway,
Cool. Cool. Um, I think the other question that I really wanted to know the answer to, if I could find it real quick. Um,
I know one question you had on there that I was interested in answering was, is there someone who you'd like to narrate for?
yes, that was actually, I was looking for that question, but I was trying to remember how I
Ti-
worded it.
Timothy
Timothy.
Zahn. Timothy
Yes.
Zahn, which I partially wanted to bring it up because I saw on your website you have like a list of stuff, and I'm like, she loves Timothy Zahn, sweet. Which I first fell in love with Timothy Zahn in 1991 when
Okay.
Heir to the Empire came out,
Yes.
and I,
In here.
for me, I love where they've gone with Star Wars with, and I know some people absolutely hate the new ones and whatever, but I do love them. But
Okay.
I adore Timothy Zahn's universe of it.
Yes.
And
I really love that they have brought Thrawn into the
yes,
canon.
I do
I
like
love.
that they've brought Thrawn into the canon, but I I probably shouldn't say this because I really would like to narrate for him, but I like his original Thrawn books better than the new ones, partially because they've there is so much in the canon now that you're just wedged into doing this little thing, which I am excited to read his new Thrawn ones that are like the prequel, like the origins of Thrawn that have probably nothing to do with the
Right.
rest of the Star Wars universe, which
Right.
I haven't read those yet, but I want to. But
Yeah.
let's see. I actually got an email today saying that he's re-releasing Manta's Gift, which is one
Oh,
of my favorites,
I did
and
not see that one yet.
it's it's cool. Um,
Is it just standalones?
yeah, it's a standalone, and that's one like I love his standalone stuff. I love the Conqueror series.
Mhm.
Um, I haven't read the Dragon and Thief. I haven't read the Dragon and Thief ones yet, but the Green and the Gray. Melantha is a name that we considered naming one of our kids. We didn't,
Oh,
but I love The Green and the Gray. It's one of my favorite books of his. And
I love he's kind of one of my like if there was an author excuse me, if there was an author that I wanted to say like that's who I want to be when I grow up, it would be Timothy Zahn. And I think
that's
some of that, like
awesome.
you asked about, are you going to write in this world some more? And it's like, I one of the things I really love about Zahn is, and he's done all the Star Wars stuff, but he's also written a lot of his own
Oh yeah.
series and standalones that just he created an entire universe for
Uh-huh.
one book. And I
Yeah.
love that. I think that's so cool. And
Yeah.
nobody does that.
Yeah.
And
Well, Ed, have you read his Quadrail series?
I've read the first book. I read Night Train to Rigel, and then I'd been telling my husband that he needed to read them, and he had like several massive sales in a row where like all of the Night Train to Rigel, all of the Quadrail books were on sale for like 99 cents, and so I bought them. And Derek has like blitzed through them. He keeps going, "You need to read the rest of them." I'm like,
You know,
so many books to read.
I I hate to say I've read the first three and a half of them. Um,
Okay.
I've been with all the books I've been narrating this year.
Yep.
I've had what domino pattern that
Mhm.
I've been halfway through that I think I haven't picked it up in about 6 months, but I need to finish that one, and then
Yeah.
then I need to read the last one. But
Yeah.
I've loved that one. It's fun.
Yeah.
Part of what I've liked about it is it's like it's a train in space, so you can do all the train tropes. Um,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
Murder on the Orient Express. So,
Right. Yeah.
but
It's fantastic.
I guess the thing that I love with Zahn, to me, Zahn is Thrawn.
Yes.
So he is the ultimate
Yes.
tactician.
Right.
And like in the Green and the Gray, for example, I'm like, dude, he's every book that he writes is so much about, plots upon plots, and somebody is pulling the strings in the background, and I love it. So
Yeah. And I love that he's created a villain who is every bit as epic and terrifying as Darth Vader, but isn't. He's
well,
not Darth Vader. He's not the same as Darth Vader. He's scary, smart.
and that's what I've loved about the newer books of Thrawn is
Uh-huh.
Thrawn isn't the bad guy.
Right.
Thrawn is Thrawn.
True.
So
Yeah.
he's he's he has his own motivations, and
Yes.
sometimes his motivations are very different from what
Yeah.
motivates the Empire.
Yes, that's true.
And
Yeah.
but anyway, so
Cool.
if you could have anybody in the world narrate your books, who would that be?
You.
Okay.
um, Once upon a time, I would have said Matt Mercer, um, just because we enjoyed watching Critical Role, and he does
Uh-huh.
an incredible, crazy amount of voices that are just entertaining. I don't know. James Earl Jones, maybe he
James
has a
Earl
good.
Jones is
Oh
awesome.
no, who's the one? Um, I don't know his name, but the guy who narrates The Name of the Wind is really good.
Okay. I don't
I've
know
been
who it
really
is either.
liking that one. I don't know. I don't know who does it.
Okay.
Clearly, he made an impression, but
There are those. There are lots of actors and whatever that I'm like, I don't know who they are, but I love their voice. Like, oh, and
right,
you talk about how do I keep voices consistent too?
right.
If there is somebody who I can model it on, who I just adore their accent,
Mhm.
um, like we've been watching Time Team from BBC. I don't know if you've
Okay.
ever seen it. It's
Oh,
an
no.
archaeology team that they've been doing this
Okay.
since 1994. There's this one archaeologist in it that I like. You have the best accent in the world. And on in Darker, that is currently in quality control, that I did for Paul Arvidsson, there's a character that I completely stole his
Nice.
mannerisms and everything. Like, dude, you're Phil.
That's awesome.
So anyway, and the like Ramius in this series, you
Yes.
have Sean Connery, which
Yes.
he just passed away,
I
and
know.
I I loved Hunt for Red October, which it was
Yes.
funny. So with him passing away and whatever, my mom and my sisters have been chatting back and forth, and they're like, "He's the only reason I could watch Hunt for Red October." And my wife is like, "Oh, you people," and because my wife has very similar taste to me, and we love Hunt for Red October, and we,
Yeah.
we love heady things, and that's the other thing is like my sister and my mom and whatever, they're like they can't get into Jane Austen because it's so wordy, and I'm like, I love language, and
Yeah.
um, that's one. Your dad had a question that on
Uh-huh.
here that um,
Oh yeah. Was it the one that was kind of more of a comment?
yeah, and to me, it was spot on for kind of how I feel about it. That
Yeah.
let's see, he says, where we go?
I've got it. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my dad said, because I asked my dad when we were talking about doing the interview, I'd asked my dad like, "Hey, do you have any questions?" Because when people ask me if I have any questions, my mind goes blank. So he sent me a couple. He said, "I have read King's Warrior many, many times because he's my first reader, at least 10 times." He says, "and it is one of my favorite books, and certainly includes my favorite literary characters. When hearing your audio presentation, you brought a new energy and a new life to the story for me. Another thing that I was profoundly struck by is that when listening to your audio presentation, I was not allowed to skim over any words or partial sentences, and the absolute beauty of the writing was more obvious to me than when reading it to myself." Um, and so it just said that you're doing a fabulous job at that. And I kind of asked if that was sort of if any thought of that kind of went into your presentation.
That's part of what I try to bring to an audiobook. And I'll be honest, not everything I've narrated is near this level at all in quality. But it's something where I'm supposed to read what's written. So
Uh-huh.
sometimes there's a sentence that I might have to do three takes on because I'm like, that sentence makes no sense. But then it's like, it's a matter of going in and figuring out, okay, maybe they thought it meant this, and so it is trying to find the meaning in every sentence. And
Okay.
with
Yeah.
your writing is awesome. And
Aw.
I can just go through, and I mean, every once in a while there's something where I'll do it's more than every once in a while. It's often there's something where I'm like, I should do a retake of that because I I didn't emphasize the thing that should have been emphasized there. Um, but it is something where when I approach anybody's work, if it's, their first novel, and I've done some that obviously didn't have an editor, um, that I'm like, okay, I can make this work.
Mhm.
And there are times when I do have to approach them and say, okay, there's this error here and this and whatever, but
Mhm.
it's something where it's a partnership, and I love growing with new authors.
Yeah.
And I, I mean, with you, it's been a matter of you're a newer author, but your work, it's not been noticed, which blows
Oh.
my mind. Um, and I hope that we can get this book noticed. And I tell anybody who wants to listen to any of my stuff, this is my favorite book I've narrated.
Oh,
And
well, thank
which
you.
is saying something, because I love this series too.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't wait to read those. I'm very excited. I have them on my phone, on my Kindle, not Kindle, Audible.
And
I think the first two. So
it's something where in a sense, even the books that might be kind of clunkers that I've done, there are elements I love of them.
yeah,
And I
that's
guess that's part of the thing that I also try to bring to audiobooks is
yeah.
I don't want to be critical of my authors. I don't want to be critical of anyone trying to create something.
Mhm.
And some people are at the beginning of their craft and whatever, but if I can help to polish it and bring a better product as an audiobook than it was as a physical book or Kindle or whatever, I'm happy to do that for people. And I love doing that. And
Mhm.
does it mean I get some reviews that are on ones that, like, this is a really boring story, and it, like, maybe, but it's also something where I didn't find it boring, even if
Mhm.
it was a little simple or whatever. I mean,
Mhm.
I've narrated several children's books that are certainly not at this level, but they're imaginative and they're
Right.
creations. So
Mhm.
anyway, I think we're about out of time.
Yeah.
I have very much enjoyed talking with you, and
Yeah.
so
This was
until
fun.
until next time,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I guess we'll say goodbye for tonight, and
All right.
let me know if I can do anything for you in the future.
All right, will do.
All
Good
right.
night, Benjamin.
Thanks. Bye bye.